Welcome back to the last of the PowerPoints on the history section of the class. And so we've talked a little bit about the 20th century in terms of social gospel and the Neo-Orthodox movement. So just a little bit then to catch us up through the rest of the history. In 1960, through 1965, John Paul the 23rd, so called Vatican II. So, okay, let's see, 1962 to 1965, called by John Paul the 23rd. So Vatican II. So again, all the councils. The Roman Catholic Church are named after where they're held. So the full name of it is the Second Vatican Council. So it met in the Vatican in the 60s. And it was an attempt to modernize the church. So it was very clear that the world was changing very rapidly, and the church had not yet caught up with it. The Roman Catholic Church had not caught up with these changes. They met for an extended period of time, and for our purposes anyway, they came up with three major modifications or changes to the church. First, the liturgy. So liturgy is just a fancy word for the way that worship is conducted. Mass is the Roman Catholic name for the church service. Under Vatican II, the rules were changed so that the Mass, up until this point, had only been spoken in Latin, but now it could be spoken in the vernacular, which is, again, the language of wherever you speak. So part of what Vatican II did was take the Mass that had only ever been done in Latin and translate it into various different languages, so that if you go into a Roman Catholic Church today, you will hear it in English or Spanish perhaps, and wherever in the world it's spoken in the vernacular. So Mass in the vernacular. Number two is a greater involvement of lay people or leadership within the church. So lay meaning anyone who is not a priest or ordained. So, of course, there is a heavy emphasis on the ordained priesthood in the Roman Catholic Church, but there felt to be a need to bring other individuals into the practice of the church. So starting in 62, 65, they began training programs for various other individuals in the church who then could help the priest during the Mass. Or one of the other things that these lay leaders will do is take the consecrated bread and wine. So the priest would consecrate it, but then they would take it to hospitals to deliver communion or the Eucharist to the sick. This has been a great benefit to the church in the 20th century, in particular with the lowering numbers of individuals committing to the priesthood. So as the numbers have fallen, the lay leadership and the training of lay leaders to do at least some of what the priests did has increased. Number three is a greater sense of ecumenism, or as you might put it, reaching out to other Christian groups. So we go back to the idea of the Unum Sanctum that said that there was only salvation only found in the Roman Catholic Church, whereas in the Vatican II, the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church decided to begin the process of reaching out to Christians who were not Roman Catholic, and to begin to mend fences and to reach across these boundaries. And so today, so for example, if you're not Roman Catholic, but you are a Christian, they would call you one of the separated brethren. So they use now the term brethren, but now in the sense of still slightly separated. So again, it began the conversation with Protestants and Orthodox churches that previously had not been been happening. So again, these are the three major outcomes of the attempt to modernize the church. So let me erase this and move on to Pentecostalism, which is another major movement within Christianity in the 20th century, and very much significant in the developing church as we go. So Pentecostalism is a movement that began in the first decade of the 20th century. Began actually at Azusa Street. Excuse me. I think it's, never mind, Azusa Street in San Francisco. So it is a movement that began out west. And now is probably, there is not a part of Christianity that is that is untouched by this movement. So Pentecostalism is, like I said, a 20th century movement that builds off the idea of baptism in the Holy Spirit. So there's this idea of two baptisms in Pentecostalism. The first is your baptism in water, which is what marks your entry into the church. Two, then, is your baptism in the Holy Spirit. And so through this second baptism, the Pentecostalist churches emphasize the activity of spiritual gifts, and they spend a lot of time going over those passages like 1 Corinthians with all the lists of the Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit. The major sign then of Pentecostal churches is the speaking in tongues. So this is an important element, but all over. So you get healing, the gifts of healing and prophecy, as well as speaking in tongues. But the sign of one's baptism in the Holy Spirit is often understood as the sign of it is speaking in tongues. Now, there are several denominations that have grown out of Pentecostalism. The most important, or the largest, not the most important, but the largest is the denomination known as the Assemblies of God. And just beyond the idea of spiritual gifts, these churches, and any other church that has the word Pentecostal in its name will also be a church the denomination that comes from Pentecostalism. They were known from the very beginning as being very egalitarian, open to all sorts of different kinds of leadership, women, uneducated, and so it brought together Pentecostalism. Became a place where people who, in the eyes of society, might not have been acceptable as church leaders, were accepted within Pentecostalism. And so it grew tremendously from California back across the United States to the East Coast, and because of their missionary activity, you will find Pentecostalism is a strong movement. It's become a global movement as well. So you'll find a lot of Pentecostal behavior and churches or influences around the world. One more thing about Pentecostalism then. So this emphasis on this baptism of the Holy Spirit, the practicing of spiritual gifts, the most obvious one, speaking in tongues. Again, any church that has Pentecostal in its name is a Pentecostal denomination. This is the most the largest of the Pentecostal denominations in this country, but you will find that Pentecostal belief has infiltrated other denominations. So you will find Methodists who practice the speaking in tongues. You will find Roman Catholics who practice spiritual gifts, etc. So if you are part of a denomination that is not Pentecostal, but you practice some of this behavior, then you are known as a charismatic. So Pentecostal, if it's a denomination, if it's a practice within a larger denomination that is not defined by Pentecostalism, then you are known as a charismatic Roman Catholic or charismatic Methodist or charismatic Lutheran, etc. So, Pentecostalism, which then gets us into the let's see, sorry about that. I'm finding where my stuff is. The idea of third world Christianity, and as we move into the 21st century, it has been said for a long time that Europe, the seat of so much of what we've studied in terms of the history of the church, that Europe is often referred to as post-Christian. Many of those fantastic cathedrals and sites and worship centers in Europe are really now mostly tourist attractions, and they're not very active churches. In America, we are in many ways moving in that direction. The move towards a secularization of life in America has very much put us on the same track as Europe. So really the vibrant growth of Christianity is taking place in what we in the first world would call the third world. South America, Africa, and Asia. And so just to give you a sense of that, I'm going to talk about another phenomenon of the 20th century, and that is these really huge churches that we've seen develop around the mega churches that have thousands and thousands of people. And in the United States, the largest church in the United States, depending on how you count it, is Lakewood, which is in Texas. That's Joel Osteen's church. And it runs, the numbers, you change over the time, but 43,000 or 44. I've heard as high as 45. And when I use these numbers, what I mean is people attending at a single location. So some churches have multiple locations, and therefore they are very, very large, have larger numbers, but that's because they have satellite churches, whereas Lakewood is a single church. It runs several services through in a given day. So that's the largest church in America. It does not even make the top 10 of the largest churches in the world. So if you were to take, and again, this is a moving target because it depends on how people count and, the statistics change, but the largest church in the world is in South Korea right now. And it has a average weekly attendance of 480,000 people. So this is big. If you look at the top 10 churches in the world for in size, 4 are in South Korea. South Korea is a huge growth in Christian belief. 4 are in in South America, and 2 are in what we would call sub-Saharan Africa. But despite these numbers, the African continent is really a major source of growth in Christianity. The Roman Catholic Church is huge and again, we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa. And so in many ways, Africa and Asia are the two biggest growth spots of the church right now. And the African church, we talk a lot in the modern context of looking towards church trends in the 21st century, the African diaspora, as Africans move out of the subcontinent to Europe, back to America, to other places. They are bringing a new and vibrant version of Christianity with them. Also, you'll find that there are missionaries coming from some of these places back to the U.S. and back to Europe to reignite Christianity in its more traditional geographical sites. So it'll be interesting to watch to see how much these third world Christian developments begin to come back into our context in the U.S. And then I'd also like to say that there's been one study, very famous study, done on religious commitments, or what the religious landscape is going to look like in 2050, and they made some pretty startling discoveries. So it took into account all religions, actually, not just Christianity. But what they found right now, Christianity is the largest single religion in the world, second to Islam. By the year 2050, Christianity and Islam will be about the same size. Christianity is losing people, and Islam is increasing in its size. So some of that has to do with, in terms of the growth of Islam, with the natural way religions grow, children. And especially in the United States, as more Islamic families come to this country, the numbers of Muslims in our country will grow. But really, the largest source, if you look statistically at this study, the largest source of the loss in numbers in Christianity is those who are leaving the church. Not conversion to other religions, but those who are just choosing no religion at all. And so that's a really interesting, between these numbers across the board, and definitely in the United States, with the population of Islam growing through just biology, I guess you'd say, and by conversion, and Christianity actually losing people because of the fact that they are leaving church altogether. So that, and then this third world Christianity is really sort of what is the 21st century going to look like. And so there are some interesting trends. And so that finishes up the after the Reformation section, and the next section for you will be theology.